I will never forget watching the final matchup of FIFA World Cup '94. It was Italy and Brazil. Watching World Cup soccer is something my family always loved to do, as do many others around the globe. As we sat there, in the living room, watching the match live, I overheard a conversation my father was having with my uncle. "Hey, did you hear about that Colombian soccer player who was killed for that own goal?" Huh? It didn't even make sense to me, especially at 8 years old. Why would someone kill a soccer player for an accidental goal? It's just a game, right? No, it's Narco Soccer. This is the story of Colombia's colorful and tumultuous footballing journey as a nation, with the 1994 World Cup encapsulating the madness within one tournament.
And as the United States and Colombia take the field.
Colombia, thousands of mourners gathered to mourn the loss
on June 22nd in Pasadena's Rose Bowl. The U.S. won a 2-1 game in which Colombia defender Andres Escobar accidentally hit the ball into his own net.
Gets the score, Escobar on the own goal, and the United States lead.
Similar to the European Football Championship, the FIFA World Cup is the biggest event in sports. That's just a fact. Despite not being the most popular sport in the United States, soccer is the biggest game in the world, and every 4 years, the world watches 32 teams battle it out over the course of a month for the right to be called the best in the world. In 1994, however, only 24 teams competed, the last time that would happen before the expansion in 1998. The country of Colombia was one of the lucky 24, and the players representing the nation. Among them, a defender by the name of Andres Escobar, nicknamed the Gentleman, mainly for his clean style of play and calmness on the pitch, which by the way has no relation to Pablo Escobar. In his career, he played for the Colombian club Atlético Nacional, a team that would emerge in the 70s as serious challengers. Colombia took their time to step into the map of world football. In the 1930s, their federation formed a national team, and they would soon get their first taste of tournament football, finishing 5th in the 1945 South American Championships, quickly following it up with a gold at the 1946 Central American and Caribbean Games. 1948 saw the birthplace of Professional Football League in Colombia. 14 years later, they were playing at the World Cup in Chile. After losing their first match against Uruguay, they would tie the Soviet Union in their second matchup, putting 4 goals past the famed Lev Yashin, arguably the greatest goaltender to ever live. But a loss against Yugoslavia in their next match ensured they were traveling back home from the group stages. FIFA 1962 would not be victorious for Colombia. They would have to wait 28 years for their next World Cup appearance, a period of 3 decades that would change the country, football, and maybe even the world forever. During the regime of the 1980s and 90s, Colombia was ravaged by an endless cycle of narco violence that captured worldwide headlines. The demand for cocaine was booming, and there was a lot of money to be made. Cartels were formed, expanded, and organized into major criminal conglomerates, usually run by one or several kingpins. In the case of the Medellin cartel, the kingpin was Pablo Escobar, arguably one of the biggest criminals in history and apparently worth $50 billion at one point in time. Pablo established a ruthless organization, kidnapping or murdering those who interfered with its objectives, organizing smuggling shipments, routes, and distribution networks in South Florida, Texas, Carolina, and other parts of the US. The massive wealth and power Pablo had enabled him to bribe government officials, and if you didn't play ball, well, there were major consequences. Escobar had a certain phrase to intimidate people, plata o plomo, translating to silver or lead. Take the money or take the bullet. The Medellin cartel was responsible for the murders of hundreds of people, including government officials, politicians, law enforcement members, journalists, and innocent bystanders. But despite all of that, Escobar was beloved by many Colombians and seen as a Robin Hood figure, and in many ways, he was, helping some of the poorest communities and providing them with employment, housing, and of course, football pitches. Pitches that would be the birthplace for many of the stars that qualified for USA '94.
was up for offside. Unreal. Goodness me.
Pablo Escobar loved soccer from a young age, so much in fact that during his rise to power he invested and went on to own Atlético Nacional. Now, with the sale of tickets for cash and player transfer fraud, it enabled Pablo to move hundreds of millions of dollars, making football a paradise for money laundering. The massive amounts of wealth coming towards these powerhouse organizations was able to do something else as well: buy better teams. Suddenly, Colombian clubs became a force to reckon with. The influx of narco money allowed them to hold their best players and even hire incredible talent from across the continent. But the narco influence barely ended there. Once money is involved and a parallel government is watching over you, football becomes a lot more than a sport. Teams were a subject of ego battles between the drug lords, making situations very tense and unsettling. Referees were gifted or threatened, based on the inclinations into awarding decisions. In 1989, the Colombian football club Atlético Nacional lost a match against American Cali, who at the time was owned by Pablo's rivals, the Rodriguez brothers of the Cali cartel. Escobar would end up having the referee killed, but that loss soon wouldn't matter, because that same year in the Copa Libertadores, Atlético Nacional would beat Olimpia from Paraguay in penalty kicks. The Colombian team had won the Continental Championship, an achievement that was as good as it was bad for footballing in the country. So with club football reaching unprecedented heights, Colombia actually qualified for Italia in 1990 and did surprisingly well, defeating the UAE 2-0, then a draw against eventual champions West Germany in the final match. After having lost their second group game to Yugoslavia, rewarding them with a place the round of 16, even after finishing third in the group, they came up against Roger Mila's Cameroon and lost 2-1 in extra time. For a country with their political status and history in world football, they had done really well. Fast forward 4 years to FIFA 1994. The United States of America would host a World Cup for the first time in history, kicking off the festivities on June 17th of '94, the same day as the famed O.J. Simpson white Bronco chase. Andres Escobar and his teammates began playing the next day, part of Group A with the US, Switzerland, and Romania. Expectations were high for the footballing nation. Between 1991 and 1993, Colombia's national team played 26 matches, including the World Cup qualifiers, and lost just once. The football legend Pelé himself had even marked them as favorites for the World Cup that year. Narco money influence was undeniable, but Colombian soccer had taken off that year. Behind the scenes, however, a different story was unfolding. The players would be entering the tournament with tremendous pressure. Rewind to December of 1993.
Here's one of the world's most wanted men was gunned down today by Colombian police in the Colombian city of Medellin.
The Colombian military had finally tracked down and killed Pablo Escobar. This shook the entire country and sent the nation into a state of pseudo-civil war. People were killing and robbing each other weeks before the tournament. One instance being midfielder Santo Herrera's son being kidnapped. Now imagine taking these mindsets to the World Cup, especially when you're supposed to be the dark horse. Colombia began their campaign against Romania, a team they were supposed to beat with ease. What transpired was anything but. Colombia could not get it in the net. Shot after shot was either saved or went wide of the goal. Romania would go on to win the game 3-1. Colombia's second match in the tournament would be the unforgettable one. What transpired during the game and afterwards would go down as one of the darkest moments in sports history. Colombia versus the USA. You couldn't even make this up. By this time, the US had years of presence in Colombian territory. Ronald Reagan and George Bush managed to convince the Colombian government to sanction extradition as a policy for those convicted of narco trafficking. A future bloodbath was emerging, and quickly. Right after that Romanian match, Santo Herrera got a message from his family. His brother had been killed. Unimaginable news to get during one of the biggest tournaments of a player's career, but he decided to continue playing for his nation. The narco intimidation didn't stop there though. Prior to the match, coach Francisco Maturana received a phone call demanding Gabriel Gomez be dropped. Gabriel was known to be a key player in Colombia's success in the last 36 months prior, but a choice had to be made. Be a rebel and play the match, or risk your family's lives. Even before the match began, you can almost feel the tension in the players' faces. Paralyzed by fear, something felt off. Was Colombia a shadow of their lofty qualifier selves? Either way, the pressure on the team was not good, because in the 33rd minute, with Escobar patrolling the Colombian box and aware of the potential danger, slid in to try to block a cross from the US's John Harkes, but only managed to divert it past Oscar Gaidola in the Colombian goal for the first and last own goal of his career. Colombia would eventually score in the 90th minute, but it could not prevent the team from facing exclusion. The final result of the match would be 2-1 US. In the final round of the group games, Colombia beat Switzerland 2-0, but the US's defeat to Romania meant their fate was sealed. The Colombian national team was finished. In the age of blood, bullets, and chaos, Andres Escobar exuded calmness on and off the pitch. I mean, his nickname was the gentleman of the field. That kind of describes in a nutshell what kind of person and player he really was. After the World Cup, Escobar decided to return to Colombia instead of visiting relatives in Las Vegas. On the evening of July 1st, 1994, just 5 days after the elimination of Colombia, Escobar decided to go out with friends for the first time since his return from the tournament. Andres had called Chanto Herrera for him to tag along. Chanto declined, telling him to stay in and lay low. Even his manager shared Herrera's concerns and told his players to be careful. The streets were extremely dangerous, but Andres went out anyways, saying, "I must show my face to my people." Upon arrival at El Indio, a bar in Medellin with friends, the footballer enjoyed a few drinks when some people began insulting him. Escobar left the premise, but the group persisted with the abuse and followed him out of the bar. While in his car, he tried to reason with the men, insisting his own goal had been an honest mistake. At this point, it didn't matter. The already tense situation escalated further. A gun was pulled, and 6 bullets went through him as he sat at the wheel of his car. Soon after, an ambulance was called, but it was too late. Less than 30 minutes later, Andres Escobar would succumb to his injuries. He was only 27. It is said that Andres was killed by the cartel, who had placed huge bets on the national team, and obviously lost. A few days later, the killer was identified as a bodyguard of one of the cartel bosses, Humberto Castro Munoz, who eventually confessed to having killed Andres. Munoz received 43 years of prison, but he only did 11 years, after which he was freed for good behavior. In the end, the inquiry never revealed if a cartel was actually involved in the murder of Andres Escobar. Escobar's funeral was attended by more than 120,000, including the president, Cesar Gaviria. The president said the footballer was a victim of the absurd violence affecting the country. There were chants of justice from the thousands of mourners lining the streets as Escobar was taken to his final resting place. The murder of Andres Escobar tarnished the image of Colombia internationally and marked the beginning of the end of Narco Soccer. This was definitely a dark moment in the nation's history. Colombian soccer under the drug lords is remembered as a sinister paradox that mixed success with tragedy and hope. It's just another moment in time. Anyways guys, thanks again for watching this episode of Lost Memories. And if you guys have any certain videos you would like to see, leave it in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any content. You can also help out the channel by supporting me on Patreon. Thanks, peeps.